A boy who used to smell like sheep is sitting on a flat rooftop in Jerusalem, and it is the middle of the night. He is a king now, but you would not know it to look at him. No crown, no guards close enough to hear, just a man with a reed pen and a strip of parchment and a sky full of stars he once watched alone in a field. His name is David. And on this night, roughly 1,000 years before a single Roman soldier will ever set foot in this land, he writes something he does not understand. He writes about a man whose hands and feet are pierced. He writes about people standing around that man, staring, gloating. He writes about soldiers dividing up the dying man's clothes and gambling, throwing lots for the last piece of clothing he owns. Here is the strange part. The execution David is describing does not exist yet. Nowhere on earth in David's lifetime does anyone kill a person by driving iron through the hands and the feet and lifting them up to hang until they cannot breathe. That method has not been invented. It will not be invented for centuries. And yet here is a shepherd king describing it in detail as if he is standing at the foot of a cross that will not be built for 1,000 years. Hold that image. We are going to come back to it. Because on a Friday afternoon far in his future, everything David wrote on that rooftop is going to happen, line by line, nail by nail, dice throw by dice throw. But not yet. This is not a story about coincidence. This is not a story about vague poetry that people bent to fit later. This is not a story about reading Jesus backward into a pile of old books. This is a story about a portrait. For hundreds of years, dozens of writers, a shepherd, a farmer, a court official, a prophet weeping over a burning city, picked up their pens in different centuries, in different cities, most of them never meeting, none of them comparing notes. And without knowing it, each one added a brushstroke to the same face, the town where he would be born, the mother who would carry him, the price they would sell him for, the silence he would keep, the grave he would borrow. They were painting a man none of them would ever see. And when you step back and look at the finished portrait, the face staring out of it is unmistakable. Let me show you how the painting was made. Start with the town. Around 700 years before David's descendant is born, a prophet named Micah is walking the dusty roads of a farming region in the Judean lowlands. He is not a city man. He is from Moresheth, a village so small most people in Jerusalem could not point to it on a map. And this rural outsider says something that should have been laughed out of the room. He says the ruler of Israel, the true king, the one whose origins reach back into ancient times, into eternity itself, will be born in Bethlehem. Not Jerusalem, the capital, not a palace. Bethlehem. A town so minor that Micah has to specify which Bethlehem he means because it is too little to be counted among the clans of Judah. That is the word he uses. Little. Too small to matter. Now think about what that means. If you wanted to fake a prophecy like this, you could not. You do not choose the town you are born in. Your parents do not really choose it either. Mary and Joseph lived in Nazareth, 70 miles north. It took a Roman emperor, a census, and a badly timed order to move the entire population back to their ancestral towns, to drag one pregnant teenager to Bethlehem at exactly the wrong moment for her, and exactly the right moment for a 700-year-old prediction. She did not plan that. Caesar did not know he was fulfilling anything, but the town was already written. That is brushstroke 1. Here is what most people miss about the next one. Around the same century as Micah, in the royal court of Jerusalem, an aristocratic prophet named Isaiah says something even harder to believe. He says a virgin, a young woman who has never been with a man, will conceive and give birth to a son, and they will call him Emmanuel, which means God with us. Now, skeptics love this verse because they say the Hebrew word Isaiah used alma just means young woman, not specifically virgin. And that is a fair thing to look at. But here is the detail that ends the argument. About 200 years before Jesus is born, a team of Jewish scholars in Egypt translates the entire Hebrew Bible into Greek, the version we call the Septuagint. And when those Jewish translators, with no Christian agenda, no New Testament, no reason to spin anything, reach Isaiah's word alma, they choose the Greek word parthenos. Parthenos does not mean young woman. It means virgin, full stop. So the claim of a virgin birth was not invented by Christians looking backward. It was sitting in a Greek scroll, translated by Jewish hands 2 centuries before the child was ever conceived. The mother was already written, that is brushstroke 2, but it gets darker before it gets brighter. Centuries earlier still, a prophet named Daniel, an exile serving in the courts of Babylon and Persia, is given a timeline. 70 weeks, a countdown of years, marking when the anointed one would come and then be cut off, killed. And the text is clear that this happens before the destruction of the city and the temple, an event history nails down to the year 70 after Christ, when Rome burns Jerusalem to the ground. Read that plainly, and the window is terrifyingly narrow. The Messiah had to come and die before the year 70, not after. There is no room to push the date to some future century. The clock was already running. And when that clock finally struck, when a child actually was born in that little town, a very frightened king was sitting on the throne. His name was Herod the Great, and we do not only know about his cruelty from the Bible. The Jewish historian Josephus, writing near the end of the 1st century, describes a ruler so consumed by paranoia that he murdered his own wife and several of his own sons rather than risk a rival. So when Herod hears that astrologers have come looking for a newborn king of the Jews, you already know what a man like that will do. He orders the soldiers into Bethlehem, the same little town Micah named 700 years before, and has every baby boy under the age of 2 killed. You can hear it. The mothers in the doorways, the soldiers who were only following orders, the one family already gone in the night halfway to Egypt, carrying the child the whole portrait was pointing to. The town was written. The mother was written. The timing was written. And already, before he can even speak, the world is trying to erase the face on the canvas. But you cannot erase what was painted by the hand of God. Stop and look at what we have so far. 3 writers, 3 different centuries, a rural farmer, a royal insider, an exile in a foreign empire. None of them met. None of them planned this together. And between them they had already fixed the town, the mother, and the timing of a man who would not be born for hundreds of years. That is the pattern, and it is only going to get sharper from here. The betrayal, the price, the silence, and the thing David wrote on that rooftop that we still have not come back to. If this is landing for you, do me one small favor before we go on. Subscribe so the rest of this portrait finds its way back to you. And leave one comment with the prophecy that has surprised you the most so far. The town, the virgin, or the countdown clock. I read them. I answer them. Now, let me show you the price they put on his head. 500 years before the cross, a prophet named Zechariah is helping rebuild a broken city. Jerusalem has come back from exile. The temple is rising again from rubble, and into that scene Zechariah drops a picture of the coming king that makes no military sense at all. He says, "Rejoice, your king is coming to you, righteous and victorious." Good so far. That is how kings come. But then the sentence turns. Lowly, Zechariah says, riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey. Stop and picture that. Every conquering king in the ancient world rode into a captured city on a war horse or in a chariot with iron and blood behind him. That was the language of power. And here's the promised king of Israel, the victorious one, coming in on a young donkey, the animal you would ride to a market, not to a coronation. Now go forward 500 years. A man from Nazareth walks toward Jerusalem for the last week of his life, and he stops, and he sends 2 of his followers ahead with a very specific instruction. Go into the village, and you will find a colt tied there that no one has ever ridden. Bring it to me. He is not improvising. He is stepping, on purpose, into a sentence written 5 centuries before he was born. The crowds throw their cloaks on the road, they wave branches, they shout for a king, and the king rides in, exactly as promised, not on a war horse, but on a borrowed donkey, lowly and victorious at the same time. That is who he said he was. Now watch what they paid to get rid of him. The same prophet Zechariah wrote something even more precise, and frankly stranger. He described being valued, priced, and the amount is named out loud. 30 pieces of silver. And then he says something that sounds like nonsense until the day it comes true. Take that silver and throw it to the potter in the house of the Lord. Hold that thought. 30 pieces of silver thrown to a potter in the temple. Now walk into the New Testament. One of Jesus' own 12, a man named Judas, goes to the chief priests and asks what they will give him to hand Jesus over. And they count out the money, 30 pieces of silver, not 40, not a random bribe, the exact figure written 500 years earlier. And it gets stranger. After Jesus is condemned, Judas is crushed by what he has done. He takes the 30 coins back into the temple, into the house of the Lord, and throws them on the floor. The priests will not put blood money in the treasury, so they use it to buy a field owned by a potter, to bury strangers in. Read Zechariah's ancient sentence again, the silver, the potter, the house of the Lord, and then read what the priests do with the money without any idea they are acting out a script. Every word lands, the price was written. The Hebrew title for the promised one is Mashiach, the anointed one, the one poured over with oil and set apart to rule. In Greek, that word becomes Christos, Christ. It was never a last name, it was a job, a throne. And here is that anointed king, sold for the price of a slave by a friend. But here's the part nobody tells you about how he responded. 700 years before any of this, Isaiah wrote the most detailed portrait of them all. A passage so raw that when you read it today, it sounds less like prophecy and more like a witness statement. He described a servant despised and rejected, pierced for our transgressions, crushed for our sins. And then Isaiah wrote one line about the way this man would carry himself in front of his accusers. He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. Like a lamb led to the slaughter, and like a sheep silent before its shearers, he did not open his mouth. Now stand in the room where it happened. Jesus is dragged before the governor, Pontius Pilate. The same Pilate the Roman historian Tacitus confirms ordered his execution. The charges pile up, lie after lie. Pilate practically begs him to answer, to defend himself, to say one word that could save his own life. And Jesus says nothing. Pilate is amazed. The Bible says he marveled, because no innocent man stays silent while they nail his coffin shut. Except this one did, because a lamb does not argue with the knife. Isaiah had already described the silence 700 years before there was a courtroom to be silent in. The donkey, the silver, the silence. The portrait is almost finished. There's only one brushstroke left, the one David painted on that rooftop, 1,000 years too early. It is time to go back to it. Come to the hill. It is a Friday, just outside the walls of Jerusalem, on a low rise shaped like a skull. 3 wooden crosses stand against a darkening sky. On the middle one hangs the man the whole portrait has been pointing to. And now, one by one, the oldest brushstrokes of all are about to come true in front of a crowd that has no idea what it is watching. Remember David, 1,000 years earlier, a shepherd on a rooftop, writing about a man he would never meet. He wrote, "They pierced my hands and my feet. And there, on the hill, iron is driven through the hands and the feet of Jesus of Nazareth, nailed to a Roman cross, a device of execution that did not exist in David's world, would not exist for another 1,000 years. And yet David described it as if he were standing 3 feet away. David wrote, "They stare and gloat over me." And there, the religious leaders stand beneath the cross and mock him, shouting for him to save himself. And then the line that has been waiting this entire video. David wrote, 1,000 years before Rome, they divide my garments among them and cast lots for my clothing. Look at the foot of the cross. The soldiers, as always, take the clothes of the condemned as payment. They tear his outer garments into shares, 1 piece for each of them. But then they come to his tunic, and John, who is standing right there, tells us this tunic was seamless, woven in 1 piece from top to bottom. And the soldiers stop, because you cannot divide a seamless robe without ruining it. So one of them says, "Let's not tear it, let's throw dice for it. Winner takes all." And 4 Roman soldiers who have never read a Hebrew psalm in their lives, who do not know David's name, who do not know they are being watched by history, crouch in the dirt and gamble for a dying man's last piece of clothing. They cast lots, exactly as it was written, 1,000 years early, down to the dice. That is the brushstroke I asked you to hold at the very beginning. That is the loop closing. And here is why it matters so much. Crucifixion did not exist when David wrote those words. Casting lots for a victim's clothing was not a custom anyone could have predicted. There was no way to arrange this, no way to fake it, no way for Jesus to engineer it from the cross. He could not hand the soldiers a script. They wrote their own scene, and it matched, word for word, a poem older than Rome itself. And the prophecies keep landing, even after he dies. David had also written in another psalm that not one of the man's bones would be broken. Now, crucifixion normally ended with the soldiers breaking the victim's legs to speed up death. They come to do exactly that to Jesus. But when they reach him, John says, they find he is already dead. So they do not break his legs. They pierce his side instead, fulfilling yet another line from Zechariah. They will look on the one they have pierced. 2 more brushstrokes, both accidental, both exact. And Isaiah, 700 years earlier, had written one last impossible detail. He said the servant would be assigned a grave with the wicked, executed like a criminal, and yet be with the rich in his death. A contradiction. Criminals were thrown into pits. How do you die a criminal's death and get a rich man's grave? And then a wealthy member of the ruling council named Joseph of Arimathea steps forward and asks for the body and lays Jesus in his own new tomb, cut for a rich man, given to a crucified criminal. The last line of Isaiah's portrait, filled in by a man who simply thought he was being kind. Now step back and let me put a number on what you have just seen. A mathematician once tried to calculate the odds of one man fulfilling just 8 of these predictions by pure chance. Just 8. Not the town, and the mother, and the timing, and the donkey, and the silver, and the silence, and the pierced hands, and the rich man's grave. Just 8 of them. The number he landed on was 1 in 10 to the 17th power, and because a number that size means nothing to the human mind, he gave it a picture. Imagine covering the entire state of Texas in silver dollars. Not one layer, 2 feet deep, across the whole state. Then mark one single coin, mix it into all the others, and turn a blindfolded man loose. He can walk as far as he wants, for as long as he wants. And then reach down, one time, and pick up a single coin. The odds he picks the marked one, on his first and only try, are the same as one man fulfilling just 8 of these prophecies by accident. And Jesus did not fulfill 8. He fulfilled dozens. The portrait is finished, and the face on the canvas is not a stranger's anymore. Because those pierced hands David saw on a rooftop 1,000 years before, they were not painted for a museum. They were painted for you. So what do you do with a portrait like this? Take 3 things with you. First, the facts. These predictions were not written after the fact, and they were not bent to fit later by hopeful believers. We know this for one simple reason. 200 years before Jesus drew a single breath, Jewish scholars translated every one of these prophecies into Greek, and those scrolls sat in libraries for centuries. The town, the virgin, the silver, the pierced hands, all of it, in writing, in a language anyone could read, generations before the man arrived to fulfill them. You do not have to take a preacher's word for it. The ink was already dry. Second, what it means for you. Look at how far ahead this was planned. 1,000 years for the pierced hands, 700 for the silent lamb, 500 for the donkey and the silver. A God who arranges the smallest details of one life across 1,000 years is not a God who is improvising with yours. Whatever season you are walking through right now, the waiting, the grief, the part where nothing seems to connect, you are not looking at a canvas of random splashes. You're standing too close to see the face, but there is a face. And third, this is the one I want you to carry out of here. Every other founder of every other faith left you their teachings, their rules, their words. This one left his teachings too. But before he ever spoke a word, 1,000 years of history had already been reaching toward him. The town reached for him. The mother reached for him. The prophets reached for him across the centuries with pens instead of hands. And on that hill, when the reaching was finally done, it was his hands that were pierced. David saw those hands 1,000 years early and did not understand them. You are seeing them now, and you can. They were not pierced for a museum, or a math proof, or an argument you win in the comments. They were pierced with your name in them. So here's my question for you, and I read every answer. Which prophecy hit you the hardest? The little town, the 30 pieces of silver, or the pierced hands David saw 1,000 years too soon? Tell me below. The portrait was finished long before you got here, but it was always, always painted for you to find.